This photograph captures one of the most shocking moments ever recorded on camera in modern political history. The image freezes the exact instant when violence breaks into public life without warning, turning a formal political event into a scene of chaos, terror, and irreversible consequence. It was taken in Tokyo in October 1960, during a televised political debate attended by journalists, party officials, and spectators. The man on the right is Inajiro Asanuma, leader of the Japan Socialist Party, one of the most prominent and controversial politicians in post-war Japan. The young man lunging toward him with a traditional Japanese blade is Otoya Yamaguchi, just 17 years old. Asanuma was a powerful figure. He was outspoken, charismatic, and deeply polarizing. He openly criticized the United States, opposed Japan's security alliance with Washington, and advocated a socialist path for the country at a time when Cold War tensions were at their peak. To his supporters, he represented independence and resistance to foreign influence. To his enemies, he was a threat to Japan's future and identity. That division set the stage for what happened here. The debate was being held at Hibiya Hall, a large auditorium in central Tokyo. Television cameras were rolling. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, as political debates often are. Then, in a matter of seconds, everything collapsed. Yamaguchi, a nationalist extremist affiliated with far-right groups, rushed the stage from the audience. He was not armed with a gun or an improvised weapon. He carried a wakizashi, a short traditional samurai sword. The symbolism was deliberate. This was not just an attack. It was meant to echo Japan's past, its warrior culture, and a violent rejection of modern political compromise. In the photograph, Yamaguchi's body is twisted forward, his face tense with effort. His hands grip the sword tightly as he drives it into Asanuma's abdomen. Asanuma's body recoils instinctively. His arms are raised, his face contorted in shock and pain. Other men on the stage reach out desperately, too late to stop the strike but trying to pull the attacker away. Their hands are frozen mid-motion, a fraction of a second behind reality. What makes this image uniquely disturbing is not just the act itself, but the context. This was not a battlefield. This was not a riot. It was a political debate in front of cameras, microphones, and an audience. Violence did not erupt from chaos. It was introduced deliberately, calmly, and with purpose. The attacker knew he would be seen. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the act to be witnessed by the nation. Asanuma collapsed shortly after being stabbed. He was rushed to a hospital but died from his injuries. Japan was stunned. Political assassinations were not unheard of in Japanese history, but in the post-war era, many believed that such violence belonged to the past. This image shattered that belief instantly. Newspapers around the world published the photograph. It became one of the most famous news images of the 20th century. Yamaguchi was arrested on the spot. During his trial and imprisonment, he showed no remorse. Less than 3 weeks later, he took his own life in a juvenile detention facility, leaving behind a message written with toothpaste and water that praised nationalist ideals. His death added another layer of tragedy and extremism to an already devastating event. This photograph is often described as the perfect capture of a turning point. The timing, composition, and clarity are almost unbearable in their precision. There is no blur, no confusion about what is happening. The blade is visible. The expressions are unmistakable. The political banners in the background remind the viewer that this was an ideological conflict made physical in the most brutal way possible. Beyond the individual lives involved, the image represents something larger. It shows how fragile democratic spaces can be. A stage, a microphone, and an audience offer no protection when ideology hardens into fanaticism. Words were meant to be exchanged here. Instead, violence answered them. For Japan, the assassination had lasting consequences. Security at political events was permanently changed. Public trust was shaken. Political rhetoric was scrutinized more carefully, but fear lingered. The idea that a teenager could carry out such an act in full view of the nation forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about radicalization, responsibility, and the power of symbols. The photograph endures because it does not allow distance. It does not soften the event with time or explanation. It confronts the viewer directly with the moment when ideology becomes lethal. Unlike written accounts, this image cannot be reinterpreted or diluted. The act is there, frozen forever, demanding to be acknowledged. What makes it especially haunting is that it was broadcast live. People across Japan saw the moment unfold in real time or moments later in replay. There was no editing, no delay, no warning. The illusion that political conflict could remain contained within debate and law was broken in front of millions. This image is not just a record of a crime. It is a reminder that history does not always turn slowly. Sometimes it turns in a single second, captured by a camera at exactly the wrong moment. And once that second passes, nothing can be undone. This photograph looks absurd at first glance, almost like a stage joke, but it documents a very real moment from the early 20th century. The image was taken in Canada in 1927 and shows a group of young men undergoing formal training to become dairy workers. Specifically, they are being taught how to milk cows. The method, however, appears deeply unsettling to modern eyes. Instead of animals, the trainees are practicing on artificial udders strapped to wooden frames, filled with liquid and positioned at human height. In the photograph, four young men sit rigidly behind these wooden structures. Each frame supports a rubber imitation of a cow's udder, complete with teats. Beneath each udder is a metal bucket, ready to collect the liquid released through repeated squeezing motions. The men's expressions range from confusion to embarrassment to strained concentration. None of them look comfortable. Standing to the left is an instructor, bent slightly forward, watching closely and correcting technique, as if this were any other practical lesson. To understand why this existed, it is necessary to step into the mindset of agriculture in the 1920s. Dairy farming was a serious and expanding industry in Canada. Milk production was becoming standardized, regulated, and commercialized. Farms needed workers who could milk efficiently, quickly, and without injuring animals or contaminating the product. Improper technique could lead to infections in cows, reduced yield, and financial loss. Training mattered. At the same time, animal welfare and hygiene concerns were growing. Putting untrained hands directly on live cows was risky. Cows could kick, panic, or develop mastitis if handled incorrectly. Training novices on real animals was inefficient and potentially harmful. So agricultural schools began experimenting with mechanical and simulated teaching tools. The artificial udder was one of those solutions. These training devices were designed to mimic resistance, pressure, and flow. The liquid inside would only release when squeezed correctly, forcing the student to learn rhythm, grip, and hand coordination. From a purely functional perspective, it made sense. From a visual perspective, it created something deeply strange. The men in this photograph are not criminals, not patients, and not subjects of punishment. They are students. Many of them were likely teenagers or young adults from rural backgrounds, sent to vocational programs to prepare them for farm work. In 1927, such training was considered modern, efficient, and forward-thinking. No one involved would have imagined that, decades later, the image would circulate online as something bizarre or disturbing. What makes the photograph powerful is the collision between intention and appearance. The intention was practical education. The appearance is uncomfortable, almost dehumanizing. The wooden frames restrict movement. The seated posture is awkward. The act itself, when removed from its agricultural context, looks humiliating. This contrast is what turns the image into a historical curiosity. It also reflects a broader truth about early industrial training. The early 20th century was full of experiments that prioritized efficiency over dignity. Workers were trained like components in a system. Repetition, standardization, and control mattered more than comfort. Whether in factories, farms, or military institutions, human bodies were expected to adapt to systems, not the other way around. There is also a psychological layer to the image. These men are learning a task traditionally associated with animals and nature, but they are doing so in a rigid, artificial environment. The fence behind them, the uniform buckets, the identical frames, all reinforce a sense of control and order. Nature has been removed from the process entirely. What remains is simulation. This photograph is often mislabeled or misunderstood. Some claim it shows punishment, humiliation, or even medical experimentation. None of that is true. It is agricultural education. But the fact that so many people misinterpret it says more about how alien past practices can feel to modern audiences. Context disappears, and shock takes its place. The image also reminds us that progress often looks strange in hindsight. At the time, this training method was innovative. Today, it looks primitive and unsettling. In the future, many of our own practices will likely appear just as odd. What feels normal within one era can become incomprehensible in another. There is no recorded outrage from the time. No scandal. No public backlash. The students completed their training, went on to work in dairies and farms, and lived ordinary lives. The artificial udder did its job and was eventually replaced by better technology, improved methods, and automation. What survives is the photograph. Stripped of explanation, it feels wrong. With explanation, it becomes fascinating. It captures a moment when humans tried to bridge knowledge and practice using the tools available to them, even if those tools now seem crude or unsettling. This image is not about cruelty or mockery. It is about adaptation, education, and the awkward stages of progress. It shows how far industries have come and how strange the path often looks when frozen in time. History is full of moments like this, moments that were once ordinary but now feel deeply out of place. That is what gives photographs like this their power. They remind us that the past was not cinematic or polished. It was experimental, uncomfortable, and often unintentionally bizarre. This is not a joke from history. It is history itself, caught in the middle of figuring things out. This photograph looks unreal, almost like a visual trick, but it captures a genuine moment from the early 20th century when experimentation, spectacle, and physical endurance blurred into everyday life. The image shows a man calmly riding a motorcycle while it rests on a wooden platform balanced on the raised legs of another man lying flat on his back. Around them, several onlookers stand quietly, observing the scene without visible shock, as if what they are witnessing is unusual but not impossible. The setting appears to be a public park or promenade, likely in Europe, sometime in the 1930s. The trees in the background are sparse, the path is wide and orderly, and the men watching wear coats and hats typical of the interwar period. There is no sense of urgency or danger in their posture. This is not an emergency. It is a demonstration. The man beneath the platform lies rigid and focused. His arms are flat against the ground. His legs are raised vertically, locked at the knees, supporting the full weight of the platform and the motorcycle above. The rider sits upright, hands on the handlebars, feet steady, as if mounted on solid ground. The motorcycle itself is not light. Machines of this era were heavy, made of steel, designed without concern for weight reduction. Combined with the wooden plank and the rider, the load on the man below is enormous. This photograph comes from a period when physical strength was often displayed publicly as entertainment and proof of discipline. Strongmen, endurance performers, and human weight-bearers were common attractions in circuses, fairs, and public demonstrations. They lifted horses, held platforms with multiple people, or endured extreme pressure to demonstrate control over the human body. This image belongs to that tradition. What makes the photograph unsettling is how casual it feels. There are no safety devices, no visible supports, no protective gear. If the man beneath were to lose focus for even a moment, the platform would collapse, and the consequences would be immediate and severe. Yet the scene is composed, almost serene. Risk is present, but it is accepted. The presence of spectators reinforces that this was meant to be seen. This was not a private test or a secret experiment. It was a public act designed to impress, to challenge assumptions about human limits. In an era before widespread regulation and liability concerns, demonstrations like this were part of the cultural landscape. People gathered to watch what bodies could endure. There is also an unspoken hierarchy in the image. The man on top is elevated, literally and symbolically. He is seated, in control, operating a machine. The man below is hidden, anonymous, reduced to function. His face is barely visible. His role is purely physical. This reflects a broader pattern of the time, where labor and strength were often separated from recognition and authority. The motorcycle itself adds another layer of meaning. Motor vehicles were symbols of modernity, progress, and mechanical power. To place one on top of a human body was to stage a confrontation between machine and flesh. The image asks a silent question. Which is stronger? For this moment, the answer appears to be the human body. This was a time when society was fascinated by extremes. Speed records, endurance feats, and mechanical innovation dominated public imagination. People wanted to see limits tested, whether in aviation, athletics, or engineering. This photograph combines all three. It is physical strength, mechanical weight, and public performance in a single frame. The man beneath the platform likely trained extensively. This was not improvisation. His muscles, joints, and balance had to be conditioned to withstand pressure without collapse. Breathing had to be controlled. Any tremor could be disastrous. What appears simple in the photograph is, in reality, the result of discipline and repeated practice. To modern viewers, the image can feel reckless or absurd. Today, such a demonstration would be shut down immediately for safety reasons. Insurance, regulation, and liability have reshaped public performance. Risk has been managed, reduced, and hidden. In contrast, this photograph comes from a time when danger was visible and accepted as part of spectacle. There is no recorded outrage attached to this image. No scandal. No known injury associated with the moment captured. It existed, was photographed, and moved on. The photographer likely saw it as a curiosity, something worth documenting but not necessarily extraordinary. That is what makes it powerful now. What was once ordinary appears impossible decades later. This photograph also reflects a broader truth about how history records strength. Physical feats rarely survive in memory unless they are documented visually. Written descriptions fade. Stories exaggerate. But an image freezes proof. The motorcycle is there. The man is there. Gravity is there. The moment cannot be argued away. At the same time, the photograph hides as much as it reveals. We do not know the names of the men. We do not know how many times they performed this act. We do not know what injuries followed years later. History often preserves spectacle without preserving consequence. What remains is a visual challenge to modern assumptions. It reminds us that the past was not cautious. It was experimental, physical, and often indifferent to long-term risk. People tested themselves and each other in ways that feel unthinkable now. This image is not about foolishness. It is about confidence in the body, belief in training, and a cultural comfort with visible danger. It shows a moment when human strength was not metaphorical or symbolic, but literal, measured in kilograms and seconds. In the end, the photograph endures because it feels wrong and yet undeniably real. It confronts the viewer with a question that has no easy answer. How much weight can a human being carry, and why did we ever feel the need to find out this way? It is a reminder that history is not just wars, leaders, and inventions. It is also the strange, quiet moments when people push themselves to extremes simply to prove that they could. This photograph captures a moment when invention ran far ahead of practicality, frozen on a frozen surface itself. The machine in the image is an experimental aerosled, designed by Russian engineer Vasily Tikhonovich Lebedev in St. Petersburg in the early 1900s. It rests on a wide, snow-covered expanse, supported by skis, powered by an exposed engine, and driven by a large wooden propeller mounted vertically at the rear. Around it stand several observers in long coats and hats, watching quietly as if unsure whether they are witnessing the future or a curiosity that will soon be forgotten. At the center of the image sits the operator, positioned low on the wooden frame, gripping controls that look improvised rather than refined. There is no protective shell, no windshield, no enclosure of any kind. The engine, gears, chains, and propeller are fully exposed. This is not a polished vehicle. It is a working prototype, built to test an idea rather than to impress. At the turn of the 20th century, the world was obsessed with speed, engines, and motion. Railways had already reshaped continents. Automobiles were beginning to appear on city streets. Airplanes were still a dream in progress. Engineers everywhere were asking the same question. How can we move faster, farther, and more efficiently across difficult terrain? In Russia, winter posed a unique challenge. Roads disappeared under snow and ice for months at a time. Traditional wheeled vehicles became useless. Horses were slow and limited. Something new was needed. Lebedev's aerosled was an attempt to solve that problem by combining aviation concepts with ground transport. Instead of wheels, it used skis. Instead of driving those skis mechanically, it relied on air propulsion. The engine turned the propeller, which pushed air backward, propelling the sled forward across ice and snow. In theory, it was simple. In practice, it was dangerous, loud, and unpredictable. The machine in the photograph looks fragile, but it represents serious engineering ambition. Every component had to work in extreme cold. Engines of that era struggled in low temperatures. Lubricants thickened. Metal became brittle. Fuel systems clogged. And yet, inventors like Lebedev continued to experiment, driven by necessity and imagination rather than certainty of success. The environment in the photograph is as important as the machine itself. The flat, frozen surface provided an ideal testing ground. Ice reduced friction, allowing even limited power to produce movement. But ice also offered no forgiveness. A loss of control could mean sliding uncontrollably, crashing into obstacles, or being struck by the exposed propeller. There were no safety standards. Risk was accepted as part of progress. The observers standing in the background are not passive bystanders. They represent institutions, sponsors, military officials, or fellow engineers. In the Russian Empire, innovations like this were often evaluated for military use. Rapid winter transport could mean faster communication, supply movement, or reconnaissance. While the photograph does not show weapons, the potential application would not have gone unnoticed. The Aerosled never became a mainstream civilian vehicle in this exact form, but the concept did not disappear. Later versions, more refined and more powerful, were used in Russia and other cold regions for decades. During the 20th century, Aerosleds saw use in rescue operations, border patrols, mail delivery, and military transport. What looks crude here is the ancestor of an entire class of vehicles. What makes this image compelling is how early it is. This is not post-war engineering. This is not a response to global conflict. This is innovation happening in relative calm, driven by curiosity and environmental necessity. The machine exists because winter existed, and because someone believed technology could challenge it. There is also a striking contrast between motion and stillness. The propeller suggests speed, noise, and force. The scene itself is silent and static. The snow absorbs sound. The trees stand bare and motionless. The people are still. The photograph captures the moment before movement, before the engine roars to life, before air begins to push against the frozen landscape. The design reveals the experimental nature of early engineering. The frame is wooden. The skis look adapted rather than purpose-built. The engine appears borrowed from another application. Nothing is hidden. Everything is visible. Modern machines hide complexity behind panels and casings. Here, complexity is exposed, honest, and vulnerable. To a modern viewer, the Aerosled may look impractical or even foolish. Why not wait for better engines? Why risk so much for such uncertain results? But that question misunderstands how technological progress works. Progress is built on imperfect attempts. Failures teach more than successes. Without machines like this, later, safer designs would never exist. This photograph also reflects a broader truth about innovation at the edge of empire. St. Petersburg was a center of science and engineering, but Russia's geography demanded solutions that Western Europe did not always need. Snow, ice, and distance forced creativity. The Aerosled is a product of that pressure. There is no celebration captured here. No applause. No obvious triumph. Just a machine, a man, and a frozen surface. That restraint makes the image stronger. It does not tell the viewer what to think. It simply presents evidence that someone tried to bend the environment to human while using the tools available at the time. History often remembers successful inventions and forgets the experimental steps that led to them. This photograph preserves one of those steps. It shows an idea in physical form, tested against reality rather than theory. Whether the test succeeded or failed matters less than the fact that it was attempted. In the end, this image is not about speed alone. It is about ambition in hostile conditions. It is about refusing to accept natural limitations as final. It is about a moment when technology was raw, exposed, and uncertain, yet full of possibility. The Aerosled of Vasily Lebedev may not have transformed the world, but it contributed to a mindset that did. It reminds us that progress does not arrive fully formed. It slides, stumbles, and experiments its way forward, sometimes across frozen ground, propelled by nothing more than an idea and a spinning blade of wood.